7th day, Middle Wind Month, 1 CE, a small tornado tore its way up Achi's western wharf. Soraka and Jaraka silently stared at the phenomenon from where they were seated near one of their barges. "Hey, Jaraka. Yeah? Can you get tornadoes in a jungle in the middle of the night?" "Beats me. Ask a damn druid." Screams of panic rose as droves of beastmen were driven before the whirling twister. Occasionally, a bolt of lightning lanced out and struck the ground behind the fleeing crowd. Going by the effects of the weather, it was magic and not the manifestation of some elemental being. Since it was magic, the tornado could breeze by within millimeters of them and not harm a single hair on their coats. And, so, they watched with mild interest as it persecuted the hapless citizens of Achi. Mitra popped her head out from under the barge's tarp, rubbing the sleep out of her eyes. "What's all the commotion, Abu Wow? A magical tornado? Are they supposed to have those here?" The Sharon leaned over the barge's railing and they continued to watch the magical twister weave up and down the waterfront. Several weeks had passed since they departed the Draconic Kingdom, which had been dreary at best as they went about their work. The imminent onset of the region's monsoon season dampened things even more, subduing the activities of Rolengork's natives. Once the entire wharf was emptied of the city's denizens, the spell dissipated, revealing a meter-long ball of fluff that floated down to settle on the wooden boards. Soraka leaned forward as he tried to make out its features. "Does anyone know what that is?" Soraka asked. "No," Mitra answered, "but it looks cute and delicious." "I bet some idiot tried to eat it," Jaraka grunted. The fluffy thing sniffed at the ground, and then it raised its head. A set of 3 strange eyes looked straight at them. "Don't make eye contact," Jaraka said in a low voice. "Too late," Mitra said lightly. Soraka's ears pricked as the tap-tap-tap of hooves over the wooden wharf steadily came closer. He couldn't tell how strong it was, but it was clearly capable of sinking their barges with little effort. "Mitra, do something." "Me? You're the bard." "Diplomacy mode, go." The barge rocked slightly as Mitra disembarked. Her 3-meter-tall form towered over the approaching being, which only stood about as tall as her heels. The fluffy thing sniffed at the boards of the wharf, and then its snout rose into the air. Soraka hoped that it hadn't come to eat Shulk's new human slaves. Mitra's tail curled and uncurled curiously. "Good evening," she said. "You look delicious." "What are you saying?" "Why, thank you," the fluff replied. "You do not act as those from this place." "Huh? We're from another part of the continent," Mitra replied. "Far to the southeast." "I am called Mitra." "I am called Valdava. My companions and I come from the northwest." "The northwest?" Does he mean the Argland Confederation, or some other place unmarked by the merchant map? "As fellow travelers," Mitra said, "we would love to speak with you. If you haven't already settled on your accommodations, you could stay with us." "I shall consult with my companions." Valdava turned around and cantered off at a leisurely clip. Mitra returned to the barge. "Happy?" "Our ships are still intact," Soraka said, "so I'll count that as a win. What do you think about that guy?" "He seemed reasonable enough," Mitra replied. "I couldn't tell how strong he was, though." "A non-detection spell? Or was it some skill or ability?" "I have no idea. That's sort of the point. Also, we don't even know what the norms for equipment in this region are, so I can't even begin to guess about his items." Non-detection was a 3rd-tier spell, and a 4th-tier enchanter was all it took to produce non-detection items. The thing was that it wasn't immediately useful in direct combat or in demand by the civilian sector, so non-detection items were relatively rare. By the same token, only abjuration specialists tended to have the spell at all. The utility of the spell was undeniable, however, so any reasonably developed country could be expected to equip intelligence operatives or high-value assets with them. "We should prepare something for our guests," Soraka said. "Prepare something?" Mitra muttered. "This isn't a royal barge, you know?" The Sharon continued grumbling to herself as she disappeared under the tarp. "Wasn't she the one who made the invitation? I don't get it. It wasn't as if they needed a royal barge, anyway." Their departure from the Draconic Kingdom took longer than Soraka had initially expected. Slavery was legal in the human nation, so it was a simple matter for the Merchant Guild officials to sign themselves into bondage. They wanted to bring their families along as well, which was understandable, but that, in turn, led to a slew of complications. The level at which the Draconic Kingdom's civilization operated meant that anything beyond a handful of humans required a minimum number of specialists to function. Those specialists didn't exist in Roland Gork, so the number of slaves grew. They wanted clothing to wear, so they needed all of the professions that went into textile production and tailoring. Tools were essential, so they ended up with the people required for metalworking and woodworking. Alchemists produced reagents for many industries, so they brought a few of those as well. Since the number of specialists and their families kept growing, Davy suggested that they bring cooks along for efficiency. Karavaki added carpenters, masons and others required for furniture manufacturing and construction. Mitra hunted down the few remaining scribes and clerks in the city to help with basic education, much to their initial terror. They kept adding more and more humans for one reason or another and, in the end, they ended up with over 200 of them. The local clan lord was more than happy to take their coin, as it would purchase many times the humans' weight in nug meat. Additional barges were purchased and filled with supplies before they could finally begin their return upriver. Each human had the yellow armbands that Clan Torika used to mark humans as property, which they claimed would also be recognized in Roland Gork. Soraka didn't trust that it was foolproof, however, so they came up with some simple, yet effective, security measures. The first was a blind. Each barge was fitted with a tarp that covered most of its length. It didn't stop people from smelling the humans, but it proved deterrent enough from heedless aggression. Not even canine beastmen would attack with only scent to direct them. Next, they purchased timber from the first few towns across the Roland Gork border. The human carpenters were put to work constructing safety cages which doubled as ribbing for the tarps, creating a comfortable space within each barge. Within that space, the humans were then tasked with transforming the barges into houseboats. Cabins with bunks were created, as were communal living spaces. When they moored at a town, the barges were tied together. Soraka's entourage occupied the vessels directly connected to the wharf and ensured that no one could make it to the humans. After that, he wasn't exactly sure what happened. A strange sort of fever overtook his wives, and that fever took the humans, as well. They stopped at every town along the river, sucking up raw resources and spitting out manufactured goods. Once Davy determined that the local markets had been amply exploited, they cast off and moved on. The convoy that was originally meant to transport Shork's new human slaves to Kostarafikara instead became a factory fleet that slowly made its way upriver, mystifying the locals with its secret processes and wondrous goods. Since Soraka intended to impress the usefulness of humans upon Shork, he could hardly argue with the results. It was far better than trying to lecture her for hours on the topic, and it helped Shork build up capital besides. The humans also benefited immeasurably from the activity. They had sold themselves to Shork in the hopes that they would avoid being eaten, and the future had been an unknown void that stretched out before them. Now, they were finding that the skills from their old lives still had value and were working to build a new life in Roland Gork. Soraka made his way over to the next boat to where Shork was resting in her bunk. The young Osalo twisted and turned fitfully in her sleep. He frowned down at her. What sort of warrior slept through a tornado? No, no more. I don't want to be civilized. Civilization, scary. Then again, she had been studying non-stop since they departed from River Garden. Since the slaves who acted as her tutors were active during the day, she ended up adopting their sleeping patterns. Shork, he gave her a poke. Shork. Wake up. Hun? What? We might have guests coming. People want to buy stuff again? That's Davy's job. Soraka grabbed the corner of Shork's new nug wool blanket, which had been crafted by her human tailors. The barge shuddered when he dumped her onto the deck. Ow! Hurry up and make yourself presentable. A lord isn't allowed to laze about when they have duties to perform. He returned to the previous vessel, where Davy and Mitra were busy preparing the office constructed in the stern of the lead barge. Rugs and cushions were placed along a long table where they usually met with merchants and lords to conduct business. A dozen of Soraka's house guard had assumed their stations along the wharf, and he went over to where Jirika was watching the waterfront from the shadows of their vessel. Your dreams have come true, Jirika said. What do you mean? The Inquisitor gestured with his nose. Savage princess detected. Soraka leaned out to look past Jirika. He spotted Vultava coming towards them, but rather than being followed by a flock of other fluffballs, 3 towering feeled beastmen of an unknown species trailed in his wake. Soraka ducked back into the ship. "They're huge. What the hell are they?" "Who knows," Jiraka replied. "I'll pray for your survival." He tried to make some sense of their guests as they came closer. 2 of them stood around 4 meters tall, while the third was about a head shorter. They all sported thick coats of fur that were snow-white on their undersides, transitioning to a light gray on their backs. The pattern of black head and neck spots which grew into large rosettes on their bodies and tails was more well-defined than that of the Tendu due to the contrast. Their broad, furry paws suggested that they hailed from a cold and snowy home, and their relatively stubby ears served to reinforce the notion. Long, thick tails 3/4 the length of their bodies undoubtedly offered excellent balance and spoke of a life in precarious terrain. Altogether, they would probably be perfectly at home in the Waldespine, but Vltava mentioned that they had come from the northwest. Of the 3, the savage princesses that Jiraka had mentioned was the most striking of all. Her coat had a perfect, shimmering luster and her turquoise eye seemed to almost glow with an inner light. The sense of the highest of apex predators exuded from every aspect of her lithe form, yet, on her person were various items that were far from tribal or savage in their aesthetic. "I don't recognize any of that equipment," Soraka said. "Me neither," Jiraka said. "She has something that's blocking appraisal abilities, too. I can't even get a sense of their value. This group might be dangerous, the 2 others are decently strong, but they may be exposing themselves purposely to throw off threat assessments." Which meant that he was getting stuffed in the back. Their appearance and demeanor were far out of line with what they had witnessed in the region thus far, so it was entirely possible that they were agents of greater powers. Soraka and Jiraka retreated out of sight while Mitra, Davy and Shork stepped out to greet the mysterious group of travelers. "Vltava," Mitra said, "will you be taking us up on our offer of hospitality?" "We have settled on our accommodations for the evening," the savage princess spoke in Vltava's stead, "but we may join you in the future. My name is Winter Moon. This is Pebble and this is Pinecone." I was most curious to discover that someone here had drawn Vltava's interest. Wintermoon's voice had a soothing, lyrical quality to it, and something more caught his attention. Mitra, too, had already detected it. "Hey G, this girl is speaking Prustonai." "What dialect?" "I don't know, but it's ancient. The older the form I compare it with, the closer it gets to what they're using." Soraka mulled over the revelation and what it might mean. It was said that the ancient world was far different from the world of the present day. Some claimed that it was more advanced, but if it was, that advancement was alien to what was now considered civilization. None of the few artifacts of those times made any sense to even the most learned scholars of the Confederacy. Only the most ancient of Dragon Lords probably had any knowledge of that forgotten era, and none saw fit to share what they knew. The unexpected link that these people had to the ancient past was no guarantee that they knew anything of it, but the possibility of uncovering some of its secrets was a tantalizing one. "You and your companions have our warmest of welcomes." Mitra pressed her paws together and dipped her head. "My name is Mitra. The Svarmini here is Davy. Shork is a resident lord of Khostorfi Keral who is traveling with us for various reasons." "Svarmini, I'm afraid that didn't come through properly." It's an honorific used for a proprietress. In simple terms, it's much like mistress, but holds distinct connotations from other uses of the term. "I see, so something like the female owner of an inn, workshop, or merchant company." "Yes, exactly that," Mitra nodded. "It's nice to speak with someone who can pick up on linguistic nuances quickly." "Well, I am a bard, after all." Mitra stepped forward, scooping up Wintermoon's paws between hers. Wintermoon reacted in alarm at the sudden movement, but Mitra bubbled over her. "Really? Me too. You must stay with us, I'm sure we have plenty to share with one another." "That's a tempting offer," Wintermoon said, "but we're currently on our way to the large city in the east." "That's Khostorfi Keral," Mitra said. "We're heading that way as well, so this is perfect. We must have been fated to meet one another, Tilda. Well, if it's like that, I suppose we could travel together." "Yay." As Wintermoon was doing all of the talking, it appeared that she was the actual leader of Vltava's party, or they were just letting their bard do the talking as he was. The 4 of them returned to their inn, promising to join them in the morning. Mitra returned to the ship, happily humming to herself. How big is this circus going to get? Jaraka muttered. How many ships are there on the Rolengork? Soraka replied. Stop grumbling, you two, Mitra said. This is a rare opportunity. You don't even know whether they're safe, Jaraka said. They're quite dangerous, the Sharon replied cheerfully, but, then again, so are we. Just because one is capable of doing something doesn't mean that one will. Only barbarians resort to raw power so readily. Something magic tornado. There wasn't any damage at all. Honestly, I think that was the right call. The people here are all about power-based relationships. The two that haven't concealed their power are much stronger than the average beastman here, so if the locals still make trouble after that, all that's left is to put one's paw down. Or hoof, in this case. Soraka sighed and took a seat at the office table. Mitra was adamant about having them over, so there wasn't much point in arguing. Additionally, she was right about it being a rare opportunity. As promised, Wintermoon and her companions came to join them the following morning. Davy had to deal with one last-minute swarm of merchants trying to get their hands on the humans' goods before they were able to proceed on their journey upriver. Wintermoon peered at the merchants making off with their goods, who looked like thieves clutching their ill-gotten gains in the pouring rain. Are common goods truly in such high demand here? She asked. They're common goods for a reason, Davy said. When common goods enter markets where they don't exist, this tends to be the result. It's such an expansive and populous confederation, Wintermoon said. I'm surprised that they don't. This is a curious story in itself, Davy replied, and an unfortunate set of circumstances. Since you consider them common goods, I assume they're plentiful where you're from? I wouldn't say that they're plentiful specifically where I'm from, but they are plentiful where there is a demand for them. That's assuming they use them for what I think they're used for. What do you mean? Well, one never knows what uses people find for various things until you see them used. Soraka snorted. She had a good point. A tool in one hand could find an entirely different use in another. They only assumed that the simple, at least by their standards, items that they were selling were going to be put to their intended use. So, Wintermoon said, how long have you been traveling in this country? We arrived from the south just before winter, Mitra replied. Through the Great Loot. The Great Loot, rumor has it that blue dragons rule in the south, is that true? I can't speak for the entire desert, but the parts we traveled through were under the Storm Dragon Lord and his followers. Do you intend to travel further than Rolengork? One country at a time is good enough for me, Wintermoon said. We can't be away from home for too long. Mitra reached into her pack, producing the trade map and laying it on the table between them. Do you come from anywhere on this map? She asked. Sorry about the quality, it's the only paper reference that we have for the region. Wintermoon leaned forward to examine the unfurled parchment. She pointed a claw at the center of the map, at the city that Mitra had identified as Erantal. Before last year, she said, my home was in a dwarf city in the mountain range north of this city, but I ended up having to move out due to political upheaval. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. My entire family was forced out, Wintermoon said sadly. After working as a courier for a little while, I resettled in the mountains to the southwest. Honestly, I prefer the new place over the old one, so it might have all been for the best. What are the countries like around there? It depends on what one defines as a country. For the most part, humans have settled in the plains while demi-humans and heteromorphs live everywhere else. This is a human-made map, so it only displays the countries that humans recognize. It seemed consistent with what they had learned so far. Since the dominant human power in the region was the slain theocracy, the human-centric views that it promoted led to a world divided between them and everyone else. Even the great forest of Ivasha, where he suspected powerful elves lurked, wasn't marked on the map, and neither were the dwarves that Wintermoon had mentioned. If that's the case, Soraka said, what are interracial relations like in this region? I believe the best way to describe the overall picture is territorial, Wintermoon replied. The region's power dynamics are entirely based on how territory can be exploited by various races. You have the usual competition for hunting ranges and tribal migrations, but there is also the human factor. From a distance, it appears that the slain theocracy has completely turned everything inside their borders into human habitat, while the Baharuth Empire is in the process of doing so while also aggressively expanding their borders. The Draconic Kingdom doesn't appear to share the same attitude, Soraka noted. The Draconic Kingdom has a Dragon Lord guiding them, Wintermoon replied. It shouldn't be a surprise that they have a more sane approach to their existence. Shork appeared from amidships, carrying a plate of nug meat in her hands. She yawned widely as she walked over to join them. "Breakfast is ready," she said. "What's going on here?" Mitra bapped the young Osalo on the head. "Make a proper greeting," she said. "Good morning." "Good morning, Shork," Soraka said. "We're just chatting about Wintermoon's home. How were your morning lessons?" "Lessons?" Wintermoon's tail twitched curiously. As Mitra mentioned, Shork is a local lord. She had the opportunity to pick up some human slaves, and they've been instructing her on various topics. "Is that so? I happen to have a few humans move into my territory, myself." "Really?" Shork said. "They arrived a few weeks ago," Wintermoon said. "I have more territory than I can manage, so I allocated some land for human-style development. Is that what you plan to do with the ones on these barges?" That's far too advanced for her at the moment," Kawabaki said. "She's still grasping the more basic things." Why am I getting treated like a country bumpkin here? I live in a big city, you know." Chuckles rose from around the table as Shork pouted. "Matters of education aside," Soraka said, "Rolengork hasn't had human slaves before now. We have to set things up so that the humans can be provided for and kept secure in Kostorofi Keral. They're practically irreplaceable, so we can't be too reckless with them." I suppose most humans are extremely fragile. Would they be attacked, though? The people I've interacted with here are nothing if not polite." "It's a problem on two fronts," Soraka told her. "Both the beastmen and the humans around here are impulsive when it comes to their instinctual behaviors. One side responds as prey and the other, as predators. Or competitors. Neither side puts much effort into mitigating that behavior, and their societies have few measures incorporated to temper nature with reason. Essentially, their growth is lopsided." Well, that's just how things are around here. Advancement tends to only be viewed in terms of economic, technological or industrial growth. Cultural and spiritual aspects are often seen as worthless or at least unimportant, so society advances in a heedless, out-of-control manner that tends to do more harm than good. The Baharuth Empire is a very good example of this, and it's an ugly thing to witness. Soraka sighed, pulling over a plate of meat that had been placed on the edge of the table. While the Draconic Kingdom exhibited promising development, it appeared that the feral human hypothesis still had strong support. "That's disappointing to hear. But what about the Argland Confederation? I heard that the Platinum Dragon Lord reigns there." "I've not been there before," Wintermoon replied. "From what I hear, they mostly keep to themselves. What about you? The way it sounds, you seem to come from a much more reasonable place." "You'll undoubtedly find those who will dispute that," Soraka's voice turned wry, "but I like to believe that's the case. I come from the Raj of Gond. Mitra here is from Masandhai Wat. I'm afraid I have no clue where those places are." "They're member states of the Beastman Confederacy." The place that attacked the Minotaurs with golems." He grimaced. "That's hardly the only notable thing about us. There was something about losing a city to some Solitas, too." "That problem has already been taken care of," Soraka said. "Plus it wasn't part of the Confederacy at the time. It's been reclaimed and repopulated now." "Truly? How did you end up dealing with it?" "Well, the main problem with Solitas is their area of effectability. If one is rendered immune to death effects or deploys assets immune to death effects, such as war golems, they become a rather straightforward opponent. All that the Confederacy had to do to safely deal with the problem was gather 3 groups of Roti-class individuals and split the 3 Solitas between them. Having legendary foes suddenly appear was certainly a problem for a single, small country, but not so much for any of the Central Powers. In the end, however, they were never able to figure out where the Solitas had come from or even why they had appeared." "I see," Wintermoon said. "Well, it's nice to have some up-to-date information. Are you still losing golems to the Minotaurs?" "What? No. That only happened once. It's colloquially known as the bad idea in the Confederacy." "Was it a bad idea?" "Of course," Soraka said. The golems that we lost were each enough to power a small factory on their own. Instead, some overly optimistic warhawks thought they could exploit a dip in the Minos League's military strength. Instead, what we got was a debacle, politically, militarily and economically. The use of golems as war machines had always been a controversial topic. Advocates of war golem production made two main arguments. First was that war golems didn't die of old age and could thus be employed indefinitely as both a deterrent and on-demand offensive power. Stockpiling war golems was a sure way to build up strength over time. Secondly, war golems partially solved the age-old problem of negative energy generation. A golem equivalent in power to a Roti-class warrior was similarly equal to a small army. While destroying living enemies would still leave a negative energy imprint, having a construct do the killing meant that losses on their part would leave none. Since wars between the central powers could involve tens of millions of personnel on each side, this became a substantial benefit. Opponents of war golem production pointed out that, while war golems indeed possessed significant raw strength, they were unwieldy and couldn't match a skilled warrior of the same strength. As such, it was better to use limited resources to produce golems for the economic benefit of the nation. Soraka was of the mind that powerful golems were better employed for industrial purposes, but voicing his opinion would achieve little. People would point out that, since he was far more powerful than any war golem, he couldn't appreciate their use as military assets the same way most others did. The Ashta Pradhan ultimately mandated that 20% of its member states' golem production go towards producing war golems while the remainder was dedicated to industrial use. This somehow pleased no one, with one side claiming that they would fall behind militarily while the other side claimed they would fall behind economically. In that case, Wintermoon said, I seem to know nothing about the Beastman Confederacy, aside from the fact that beastmen live there. Even that part isn't true anymore, Soraka said. Well, not wholly. All manner of species live in the Beastman Confederacy these days. Oh. Wintermoon quietly looked down at the table, stroking her long, thick tail in her lap. Soraka wondered what it felt like. Then it appears that everything that I know about the Confederacy is inaccurate or out of date, she said glumly. Mitra reached out and placed plates of meat in front of Wintermoon and her companions, including Viltava, for some reason. Don't worry about it. She grinned, we have plenty of time to chat. Let's enjoy our time together. 10th day, Upper Wind Month, 1 CE. In the darkness past nightfall, a barge silently glided up the river to bump against the pier below Shork's ancestral clanhold. Shork disembarked, padding her way over the wooden boardwalk and ascending the ramp to the top of the ancient stone hillock. Father? Her father, Itzli, looked up from a stone brazier above the Kuroko's cliffs. Shork? Welcome back. You've been gone for so long that I started to fear for the worse. He came forward and wrapped her up in a hug, then examined her at arm's length. Did you get taller? What in the world have they been feeding you? She had grown a bit taller, which was very strange considering she was sure she had stopped growing a year previous. As for what they fed her, it was harder to digest than any sort of meat. Maybe seeing some things made me stretch out a bit, she scratched the back of her neck nervously. Shork looked down at the stony ground. She thought she had figured out what she was going to say, but the words fled her the second she got home. Is something the matter? Her father asked. That Soraka fellow didn't do anything to you, did he? No, Shork said quickly. I bought some slaves. I need to put them somewhere. Slaves? But slaves are expensive. We can't afford to keep any slaves, Shork. Most could barely afford to feed themselves and their family in Kostorofi Keral. Anyone who owned slaves used them to crew fishing boats or help herd nug, but all that work was already being done by regular citizens in their clan's old territory. They're not that expensive to feed, Shork said. Karavaki and Devi even showed me how to make them profitable. Slaves don't just magically become profitable on their own, her father told her. We only have this inn and some of the jungle around it. How many of these slaves did you bring with you? 237. What? Heads turned up at her father's startled shout from the row of stone dens nearby. Shork raised her paws, waving them around in an effort to quell her father's mounting distress. It'll be okay. How can it be okay? Do you know how much it takes to feed that many people? Just come with me. The explanation is really complicated. Short didn't get most of it. At the same time, Davy's efforts met with spectacular success, so she couldn't argue with the results. Down at the riverfront, Soraka and his warband were stretching away the cramped muscles that came with their long journey. The strange beastman named Wintermoon that had randomly attached herself to them was also out with her companions. "Itzli," Soraka said. "As promised, I brought your daughter back in one piece. And I thank you for that, good lord." Her father's gaze flickered back and forth. "But I heard something distressing just now." "Distressing?" "Something about slaves." Soraka's emerald eyes went to Shork. She returned his gaze with a lost look. The now lord cleared his throat. "Well, maybe it's a bit much to take in all at once. How about we make some introductions first?" Only 2 of the barges in their convoy could fit along the pier. The rest were lined up along the river behind them. They had left Khorstorofikerail on a single barge and had somehow come back with 20. Half of them were loaded with goods accrued through Davy's river trade. Davy took her cut of the profits, but the remainder was more than enough to get things started in the city, or that's what they claimed, at least. Soraka gestured for Shork's father to join him aboard the second barge. He was understandably confused as to why introductions couldn't be made on the pier, but stepped down to the deck anyway. Just inside the cover deck of the vessel was Master Leeds, the former head of the River Garden Merchant Guild. "A monkey?" Shork's father furrowed his brow. "A human," Shork corrected him. "This is a human? But where did its tail go? Removing it seems horribly cruel." Master Leeds' cordial expression faltered just a bit. "Humans aren't supposed to have tails, father," Shork said. She had no idea what her father knew of humans, but she did know that he had never been outside of the city. Most of the residents hadn't. The only ones who went abroad were those who had secured jobs that required it. Traveling as Soraka and his people did was unheard of, as one couldn't hunt in the territory of others and few could afford the expense of paying for provisions. "This is Master Leeds," Shork gestured to the black-haired human. "He's going to help us set up a merchant guild here. Master Leeds, this is my father, Itzli." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Itzli," the human bowed slightly. "If you don't mind my asking," her still bewildered father said, "how did my daughter come into the possession of so many humans?" "We had the good fortune of having Lady Shork visit our home city of Rivergarden," Master Leeds said. "She assessed our value as being more than our weight in meat, so we happily signed contracts of indenture with her. We're excited to see what sort of future we can build together with your daughter." "Future?" Soraka cleared his throat. "That discussion can wait," he told them. "We need to get everyone settled. Shork mentioned that you have a perfect place to put everyone." Everyone turned their attention to Shork. She resisted the urge to take a step back. "I was thinking we could just put them on top of the hill." "But we live on top of the hill," her father said. "Yeah," Shork said, "but it's just us. It's still an old clanhold. We can put hundreds of people up there once we clean it up. It'll be the safest place to put everyone." "Do you even know what these humans need to live?" "We've spent over a month traveling upriver to find that out," Shork replied. "They'll be fine, father. The humans can build their own homes and make everything they need." "I don't know, what about the inn? We can't let them disturb our guests." Why is he so hesitant? "I worked so hard to learn, too." Did he just like humans? That shouldn't have been the case. It was probably her. He always advised her to do familiar, reliable things, but she always went off and did other stuff. Now she was doing something that she barely had any clue about. Shork stared quietly at the deck. She always went behind her father's back on all sorts of things, but this was bigger than herself. It wasn't something she could just casually reassure other people about. "Why won't you just let us try?" Shork asked. "We already put in a lot of work to make it work. Who will it hurt?" A crushing pain shot up her tail. She jumped up with an agonized yowl, turning to find Voltava behind her. "Weak," he bleated. I beg your pardon? And did you just bite me?" Shork nursed her injured tail in her paws. It was all crooked and definitely broken. People said that Osalo had powerful bites, but Voltava bit much harder. "Weak," Voltava repeated himself. "Your words do not match the weight of the burden that you carry. It is annoying." The glow of healing magic washed over her. Her tail uncrooked itself and the excruciating pain faded away. She touched the injured area gingerly. Everything was back to the way it was before. What did he mean by that, Shulk? Her father asked. She glanced from person to person, trying to work up something convincing to say. As Valdava had noted, however, everything she came up with felt weak. I'm going to rebuild our clan, father. Huh? But our clan hasn't existed for generations. I'm still doing it, Shulk told him. I can't help but do it, and our people need it. We're just wasting our lives away in this city. Everyone works so hard, but no one gets anywhere. There's nothing to look forward to and, in the end, there's nothing left behind. Our ancestors could build things that lasted for centuries, but everything that we make rots away in a few seasons. We can't stay stuck like this. There's so much we've lost, but we can't just stay lost forever. There were so many big problems on their way, too, but she didn't want to scare her people. Soraka was certain that something terrible would happen because of what was going on in the Draconic Kingdom. He also said that the Yorgulans and some powerful tribe in the Walled Spine were up to something in the east, and it meant trouble for Roland Gork. Most were ignorant of the fact that their whole country was at the mercy of the Great Loot because of the dependencies that they had developed. She didn't think she could do much, but she still had to do something. Hopefully, other people would start working toward the same goal. They needed to become strong enough so that they couldn't be so easily snuffed out. I had a sense that you were up to something, her father said, but I wasn't aware of the scope. It didn't start out that way, Shulk replied. It just got huge before I knew it. Well, I don't think I have any right to get in the way of such a thing. You can go ahead and do whatever you've been planning, just don't get us in trouble with the ruling clans. Thank you, father. Shulk nodded to Master Leeds, who disappeared into the barge to return with the first set of humans. 2 were his children, his wife had already been eaten, and the rest were in a similar situation. Most of the adults were actually females who were left alone due to the natural common sense of predators. Females in a herd gave birth to more prey animals, so they weren't targeted unless times got desperate, they became diseased or crippled, or they displayed problematic traits. It took the humans a good half hour to follow Shulk up the winding walkway to the top of the Kuroko's cliffs. The cliffs were, in reality, part of a kilometer-long ridge with the local river on one side. The hilltop was her people's clanhold, which was divided into 3 main terraces. Shulk, Karawaki said, how come you didn't tell us that your clanhold looked like this? Looked like what? This entire area is an ancient ruin, the priestess said. You can see bits and pieces of what was here before. A part of her grew defensive over her home being called an ancient ruin. They did their best to take care of it, too. The clanhold wasn't bits and pieces. We just live in the places where our ancestors lived, Shulk said. Isn't that normal? It's just dens and stuff. The entire area merits study, Karawaki told her. Well, I suppose we'll have the time to do that now. As they made their way through the lower terrace, dozens of people stopped what they were doing to watch Shulk's procession go by. She hoped that the humans would remember how to behave. After climbing up to the second terrace, she went over to one of the long, grassy courts stretching along the main street. Is this enough space, Master Leeds? Shulk asked. More than enough, Lady Shulk, the man replied. We can take everything apart and put it back together up here. Where should we begin building permanent structures? The second terrace is supposed to be a communal space for the entire clan, Shulk said. There's an old market plaza on top of this wall over here. It's not a market anymore? No, her father said. When the city grew around us, this place stopped being the center of activity. The defenses weren't necessary anymore and all the markets relocated to the riverfront. It's the same story for all of the other clans that used to be where the city is now. I see. This seems ideal for setting up our industries, though moving water up here might be a pain until we can build something to do it. I still have no idea what Shulk is planning. In short, Mr. Ritzley, Master Leeds said, she wants to introduce various industries from the Draconic Kingdom. Well, they're not unique to the Draconic Kingdom, but they certainly don't exist here. From our time coming up the river, we've felt out what's profitable and what's going to require investment to get going. The next set of humans arrived at the court, lugging bags full of tools and materials with them. One of the blacksmiths in the group came up to speak to them. Where are we setting up our furnaces? He asked. This court here is the warehouse, for now, Master Lead said. There's a plaza on top of the wall there. We can set up stands around it like a market square. Once morning comes, we can figure out what workshops go where. More and more humans came in and the court was filled with all sorts of things transferred from the barges. The canvases that covered the ships turned into makeshift pavilions for their goods. Their emptied barges were anchored upriver below the old dam to be used for trade in the future. Shawk stayed out of their way, for the most part, answering the occasional question from Master Leads. The Osalo living on the terrace below also had questions of their own, and the first few approached Shawk not long after the humans stopped moving things between the clan hold and the pier. Shawk, what's going on here? Elder Potley stood at the head of a group of other elders, their faces marred with uncertainty. Elder Potley, Shawk bobbed her head. I brought some humans back with me. I heard they were humans, the elder said, but why did you bring them here? They were going to be eaten, so I bought them as slaves instead. I remember what Miss Karawaki said before you left, but I thought all of the extra food would go to our own people, not humans. Did humans eat fungus? If she recalled correctly, they could eat some of the mushrooms that were foraged from the jungle by Soraka's hunters. They could eat all sorts of things, and they didn't eat much compared to any of the beastman species living in Roland Gork. They're their own thing, Shawk reassured Elder Potley. I brought them here to make things and teach us how to make those things. It's hard to explain, people will get it once they see what's going on, I think. Oh, by the way, can you elders tell the people not to spread the word about these humans? The last thing we need is one of the big clans coming around demanding some as exotic food or as some kind of entertainment. I can't replace them easily. I can't promise that word won't spread, but we'll let everyone know. We need warriors soon. Keeping the humans out of sight and reach would likely prevent most incidents, but people were bound to come sniffing around. Human ways were pretty inconvenient in that sense, they needed so many things to function properly and they couldn't support a warband until things started to function properly. The next morning, Master Leads called Shawk out to join him at the plaza where the humans had set up their tents. He led her over to where the blacksmiths and their children were tending to what looked like termite mounds raised on the stone. Davy and Karawaki were already there with several of their attendants. What are those? Shawk gestured toward the mounds. They're clay furnaces, Master Leads told her. We've already fired them up and put them to work, but this next part is what we'd like you to witness. It's a momentous event. Shawk looked around, trying to figure out what was so special about what was going on. Aside from the clay furnaces, there were 2 tables under the pavilion they had raised. Both had various unknown objects on top of them. I don't get it, she said. You'll see. Master Lead's lips were curved up in what humans considered a smile. Let's begin. One of the blacksmiths picked up a pair of metal pincers and reached into the furnace with them. He pulled out a black jar-looking thing that was filled with glowy stuff. Watch out, Lady Shawk, the blacksmith said. You might light your fur on fire if you touch this. Shawk backed away. The blacksmith went over and poured the glowy stuff into a hole in the side of the flat black box on the table. When it overflowed, he shifted slightly and filled another hole. That's a block of adamantite, Master Leads said. More importantly, it's a mold for casting blanks. I don't know what those are, Shawk said. The first blacksmith went to put the black jar back into the furnace while the second laid the black box on its side. He took off the top half, revealing a dozen circular objects within. Those are blanks, Master Leads told her. And, now, we turn them into trade coins. TR trade coins? You can do that? Out of curiosity, Jarika said from her left, where do you think trade coins come from? Some legendary place? A mystical tree that has seed pods filled with them, maybe. Good guess, Jarika nodded. Your clan hold is about to become a legendary place. Really? Shawk's eyes grew wide. She tried to imagine the transformation that would take place. Maybe beautiful flowers would blossom everywhere while sunlight and coins rained down through the canopy. Jarika furrowed his brow at her reaction. It was a joke, he said. Oh. Shawk shook the image out of her imagination. It might become a legendary place, Mitra said. The nexus upon which the destiny of Roland Gork rests. That's too much. Shawk moaned, All those big things that you talk about are too big for me. But I wanted to compose an epic of your legend. No. Shork cringed and covered her head with her paws. Laughter rose around her. In all seriousness, Master Lead said, it's nothing out of the ordinary. Every city branch of the Merchant Guild is authorized to mint trade coins when the situation calls for it. We brought all the necessary tools along. Money was one of the major points of concern when the Svarmini here shared her thoughts on the state of Rolengork's economy. In their new environment, the hastily assembled human slaves needed to figure out what was edible and what could be turned into useful goods. Davy and Karavaki spent a great deal of time with the humans, helping out where they could. Despite being shipped straight into the heart of their longtime nemesis territory, the humans appeared resolved to make the most out of their situation. It was better than waiting to be randomly eaten, at any rate. Many were hopeful that they could improve things for their fellow humans by changing the way that the beastmen of Rolengork viewed them. To make what we're doing here work smoothly, the Guildmaster said, we need to address the fact that barter is the primary form of trade. So we make these coins. Shork looked down at the blanks, then buy stuff with it? Will people still sell things to us if they know we're making them for free? Can we become rich by making as many coins as we want? You still need the metals to make them. Also, currency is something people use to exchange for goods and services, so it's only as valuable as what it can purchase. Rolengork's merchants already use trade coins, Davy added, so there shouldn't be a problem with it. They have a massive influx of trade coins from the Draconic Kingdom, so outsiders won't notice what we add to the supply of coins. Soraka stepped forward, raising a paw for silence. You're trying to answer her questions, Soraka said, but your explanation is meant for a merchant. A merchant has unwavering confidence and an inherent understanding of the mechanisms of trade, but a lord does not. Even in the world beyond Rolengork, most people don't even understand what determines the value of the coins that they use every day. Soraka turned to face Shork. Currency is a standardized medium of exchange, he told her. A unit of value. If one went to the docks to look for work, what unit of value does a foreman offer prospective laborers in exchange for their labor? 3 portions of meat, Shork replied. A portion is how much one adult needs for a day. No wonder they hire the biggest laborers possible. Davy muttered. If a foreman offered you coins instead, Soraka asked, would you accept them? If I knew I could get the same amount of meat or better, sure. Would you consider this common thinking in the city? Yes. As a lord, Soraka told her, you'll be borrowing this thinking to gather what you require to run your clan. For instance, you're probably worried about whether you can provide security for your clanhold. Shork nodded. How would you go about gaining warriors? I'd have to pay them enough so that they'd work for me. It's 4 portions of meat per day for someone strong in the city, but our clan needs its own warriors if we want to be recognized as a warrior clan. We'd have to provide for their training and pay them for their work. Can your herd support that? Not right away, but this was never part of the original plan. I thought we'd slowly train warriors and grow our farms as we could feed more warriors to protect them. Now, I need hundreds of warriors to protect the clanhold and the humans inside. It wasn't a fair question. They had left the city with one idea and come back with 20 others. That's how most people in Rolengork think, Davy told her, but currency provides a far greater degree of flexibility to an economy. Bartering in perishable goods is inefficient. It is even more inefficient if one needs to produce goods prematurely to pay others with. By creating currency to be used, it allows providers of goods and services to offer those goods and services when it is optimal. This, in turn, allows markets and industries to function more smoothly. It's simply a superior way to facilitate commerce. What is familiar and seemingly stable is always tempting to cling to, Soraka told her, but it's usually slow. In River Garden, I saw an opportunity for you to take a small, manageable hop forward. Davy and Karavaki have already given you a glimpse of what this small population of humans is capable of. So you want me to? Stop thinking about what I want, Soraka said. Think about what your clan will need in the future. Shork flinched at a metallic tapping sound coming from beside her. The 2 rows of shiny copper blanks came out of the mold, and the blacksmiths separated them from one another. Once that was done, they took one of them and placed it inside another pair of dark metal objects with a round spot for the coin to fit in. What happens now? Shork asked. She jumped away as one of the blacksmiths swung his hammer. It struck the combination of objects with a loud clank. By the time she came back, the two smiths had taken everything apart again. Master Leeds picked up the copper blank and presented it to Shawk. "Isn't this?" Shawk reached into her pouch and fished out a copper coin. Her gaze went back and forth between the two as she flipped them back and forth. Aside from one being much shinier than the other, they were perfectly identical. "Is this real?" she asked. "It sure is," Master Leeds answered. "Every city branch of the Merchant Guild has the dies required to strike copper, silver, gold and platinum trade coins. Money supply is one of Roland Gork's main problems, and we're equipped to solve that." "But where did you get the copper from?" A blacksmith placed a green stone on the table between them, then returned to striking more coins. "This is malachite," he said before taking another swing. "Your people use it to make jewelry and paint, but it can also be smelted into pure copper." "What's smelted?" Simply put, we heated it up in that furnace over there until the copper came out. Any blacksmith worth their salt knows how to get metals from various ores. The Svamini mentioned that a lot of alluvial mining goes on here, and, well, we'll get around to taking advantage of that once we get established here. If you can make any coin, then shouldn't you have made platinum coins instead?" "We could," Master Leeds said, "but that won't be of any immediate help. I heard a copper coin can get someone 2 portions of meat in this city. That sound about right?" Shawk nodded and the guildmaster grunted in response. "Then you're not paying anyone working for you in platinum, gold or even silver anytime soon. Normally, one could just go and trade higher denominations of coin for lower ones where they're available, but I hear that things are already pretty complicated between you guys and Stormport. It's best to stick to adding to the local circulation, for now. All that looting you guys have been doing to the west should help some, but it's not nearly enough." "I didn't loot anything," Shawk grumbled. "We know," Master Leeds said. "You're trying to get to an honest start. That's a big part of why we're also willing to cooperate with you.